If you have ever poured your entire life into a piece of earth, if you have ever spent decades waking up before dawn with dirt under your fingernails and the weight of a quiet house pressing against your ribs, then maybe you will understand why I never said a single word about the money. Not once, not in 34 years. My name is Margaret Miller. I am 65 years old, and if you saw me walking down Larker Lane in Columbus, Ohio, you would likely take me for just another retired widow tending to her yard. My canvas work jacket is frayed at the cuffs, my rubber garden boots are permanently stained with rich, dark Ohio clay, and the back porch of my small wooden home always smells faintly of damp soil, chamomile, and old cedar. For the last 26 years, this place has been my entire world. Right now, as I speak to you, the late summer sun is catching the edge of my 15-acre tree and flower nursery. The rows of heritage climbing roses, deep crimson and pale cream, are blooming heavy along the wooden fences. My late husband, Thomas, built those fences by hand the year our son, Marcus, took his first clumsy steps. Thomas didn't live to see Marcus grow. He died of a sudden heart attack when Marcus was only 9, leaving behind a young mother, a half-built greenhouse, and a quiet grief that hollowed out this house for a very long time. I remember what it felt like to sit at the kitchen table by a single desk lamp, counting coins to decide whether to buy heating oil or groceries. I remember the bitter chill of those winters and the way fear tastes when you are completely alone with a child who depends entirely on you. So I worked. I didn't just survive, I built. While other people saw dirt, I saw science, patience, and survival. I spent my days kneeling in the mud, cross-pollinating drought-resistant rootstocks, studying plant pathology, and experimenting with unique botanical strains that could survive harsh Midwestern winters. It took years of skinned knuckles and quiet perseverance before my work caught the attention of agricultural developers. Over the decades, those patents I filed for climate-hardened root systems and exclusive botanical strains began to generate royalties. When the city expanded its municipal boundaries 3 years ago, a portion of my outlying acreage was rezoned for a major public conservation corridor. The checks arrived quietly in the mail, zeros multiplying behind numbers I never cared to count. By the time all the patents, land sales, and agricultural settlements were tallied, the total came to exactly $120 million. Let that number sit in the air for a moment. $120 million. It is an astronomical, terrifying amount of money for a woman who spent 40 years mending her own gardening gloves. But I didn't touch it. I didn't buy a luxury sedan, I didn't move into a penthouse, and I didn't change the way I lived. I kept driving my dented 2008 pickup truck, I kept clipping coupons from the Sunday newspaper. I put every single cent of that fortune into an irrevocable legal trust, with my name listed as the sole trustee. People ask me why I did it, why hide such staggering wealth from the world, and, more importantly, why hide it from my only child. The answer is simple, though it took me a lifetime of heartache to understand it. I didn't hide the money because I was selfish. I hid it because I loved Marcus too much to ruin him. I watched the children of wealthy families grow up hollow, chasing bank statements and status symbols. I wanted Marcus to know the satisfaction of hard labor. I wanted him to build his own life from the ground up, the way I had and the way Thomas would have. I wanted him to chase a purpose, not a price tag. For a long time, I truly believed he was turning out that way. He went to college, he got a job at an investment firm, and he seemed to carry himself with the quiet dignity of a young man who understood effort. That illusion lasted 6 days ago. I remember the exact date because I had just finished deadheading my climbing roses along the western fence line, pressing the damp earth back around their roots. 6 days ago, I sat in the second pew of St. Andrew's Church, watching Marcus stand at the altar in a tailored charcoal suit, promising to honor and cherish his new bride, Deborah. He looked so upright, so remarkably like his father, that my eyes burned with a sudden warmth. They seemed so happy. I sat there in my modest Sunday dress, feeling a profound sense of relief that my boy had finally found his footing in the world, believing our family was entering a peaceful new chapter. I had no way of knowing that the papers were already signed. I had no idea that while I sat in that church pew praying for their happiness, the machinery of a very different kind of betrayal had already been set in motion. The wedding cake was barely eaten, the flowers from the reception were still fresh on my kitchen counter, and my son had already decided that the most valuable thing I possessed was freedom from my own home. The ink on the wedding guest book was barely dry, and the scent of white roses from the reception was still lingering in the air, when the peaceful silence of my nursery was shattered. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, just 6 days after I sat in that second pew at St. Andrew's Church watching my son make vows he apparently never intended to keep. I was out by the propagation tables near the western fence line, using a soft cloth to clean the dust off my pruning shears when I heard the heavy crunch of gravel in the driveway. It wasn't the familiar, comforting sound of my old pickup truck. It was the low, expensive hum of a high-end European motor. I straightened my back, instinctively wiping my earth-stained palms down my jeans, and looked toward the front gate. A brand-new pearl-white Range Rover stood idling where the driveway met my gravel path, temporary paper dealer plates still taped inside the rear window. The passenger door swung open first. Deborah stepped out, her movements brisk and calculated. Even though the afternoon sun was dipping low, she wore oversized designer sunglasses and a tailored cream-colored blazer that cost more than the monthly budget of my entire greenhouse. She didn't offer a polite greeting. Out from the driver's side stepped a heavy-set man in his 40s, wearing a charcoal business suit that felt entirely out of place among the azaleas. He carried a sleek black leather portfolio case tucked firmly under his arm, the kind of briefcase that only ever appeared in corporate liquidation hearings. He had that specific, practiced expression of a man well paid to feel nothing. I walked slowly around the corner of the shed, my boots crunching softly. A fleeting, foolish flutter of hope crossed my mind. Perhaps they wanted an old family recipe. "Deborah," I called out, my voice cutting through the car engine. "What a surprise! Where is Marcus?" Deborah did not answer directly. She walked up the flagstone walkway just far enough to stop about 6 feet away, planting her heels firmly on the stone, as if afraid to touch the actual soil. She gave a curt nod toward the man beside her. Without waiting for an invitation, the man stepped forward, and he unzipped the black portfolio with a sharp sound and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers bound with a heavy black clip. He didn't extend a hand, simply holding the papers out toward me, like a process server delivering a summons. "Gerald," said, his voice flat and rehearsed. "Mrs. Miller, my name is Gerald Fenwick, outside legal counsel representing First Capital Trust Services, the new holder of record on this property. I'm here to formally notify you of the transfer." I stood frozen on my own front walk, staring at the stack of papers. My mind scrambled for context. I looked from Gerald's blank face over to Deborah, who was staring down at her freshly manicured nails with profound boredom. "New holder of record," I repeated, the words tasting heavy. "Son, I've owned this property free and clear for over 26 years. I paid off the mortgage the year Thomas passed away." Gerald adjusted his silk tie, bracing to deliver a blow. "Not according to the county recorder's office, ma'am. This property was refinanced 8 months ago and subsequently sold in a private transaction 2 weeks ago. The new buyers intend to begin structural renovations promptly. You have until Monday morning, 72 hours from now, to vacate these premises. If you're still here past 9 a.m., we will involve the Franklin County Sheriff's Department." 72 hours. Vacate.
Sheriff's Department. The words landed like heavy stones dropped into a quiet pond, sending ripples that knocked my thoughts off balance. I looked past the suited lawyer to my new daughter-in-law, searching desperately for a trace of human decency. "Deborah," I whispered, my voice stripped of all pride. "What in God's name is happening here? Where is my son?" Deborah let out a sharp, audible sigh of deep inconvenience. "Marcus is at a corporate closing dinner, Margaret. He asked me to handle this because he knew it would upset you. And frankly, he was right. The house is sold. It's done. Gerald is just delivering paperwork. You should be using this time to pack instead of interrogating us on the lawn." My hands began to tremble, but it wasn't fear. I flipped through the papers right there on the path. A deed of trust, commercial refinance records, and a power of attorney granting absolute authority over my real estate to my son, Marcus Miller, dated 8 months back. And at the bottom, in crisp black ink, was a signature. My signature. It was flawless, and it was a complete lie. I never signed that document in my life. Gerald checked an expensive watch on his wrist. "I'd recommend contacting a moving company sooner than later, Mrs. Miller. My card is in the folder. Any further correspondence goes through my office." Deborah turned without another word, her heels clicking sharp against the stone as she got back into the Range Rover. Gerald followed. The engine hummed and they backed out of my driveway, leaving me standing alone holding a folder of forged lies. I stayed on the porch as the evening cooled off, feeling a deep internal cold. My own son, married 6 days, had decided his mother was worth more evicted than loved. They thought I was a soft, forgetful old woman who would fold at the first letterhead. I folded the papers, tucked them under my arm, and walked back inside. I had a phone call to make. I sat at my husband's old oak desk under the lamplight and dialed Priscilla Odom, my old family attorney.
The digital phone on my desk rang precisely at 8 o'clock that evening, its sharp ring cutting through the shadows of my quiet study like a physical blow. I didn't rush to pick it up. I let it ring 3 times, listening to the cedar-paneled walls echo the metallic sound before I slid the switch on the small digital audio recorder hidden securely inside my shirt pocket and pressed the receiver to my ear. "Mom?" The voice that came through the speaker was coated in a thick, artificial layer of honeyed concern, the kind of carefully rehearsed warmth that professional salesmen use right before they close a trap. It was Marcus, launching straight into his well-practiced script, asking if I was okay and pretending to be deeply distressed that lawyer Gerald had reported me being overwhelmed by the sudden eviction notice. I kept my breathing steady, forcing every ounce of tremor out of my chest, exactly as Priscilla had instructed me during our afternoon consultation. "Let them think they are winning, Margaret," Priscilla had warned me over the phone, her voice carrying the cold weight of legal strategy. "If they believe you are broken, they will grow careless. That is when we catch them." Adopting the persona of a bewildered, fragile old woman, I answered him with a cracked, trembling voice, asking how the house could possibly be sold out from under me when I had never signed any such document. Marcus didn't miss a beat. The momentary facade of family sorrow vanished instantly, replaced by a patronizing, soothing cadence that made my blood run cold. He sighed with exaggerated patience, treating me like a troublesome toddler who had misplaced her keys, and casually claimed that I had executed those papers right at my desk 8 months prior during a Sunday family dinner, insisting that my failing memory was simply playing tricks on me. I gripped the edge of the wooden desk until my knuckles turned stark white, listening as he weaponized a fabricated medical narrative of early-onset dementia. It was a calculated trap, a deliberate continuation of the gaslighting campaign that had begun 3 weeks earlier.
My mind flashed back instantly to that terrifying afternoon when I smelled burning plastic from the back utility shed and found a pile of synthetic weed matting deliberately shoved against the heating unit, smoldering furiously. At the time, I had put it out with a bucket of water, foolishly assuming it was an electrical glitch. Now the horrible truth was blindingly clear. Marcus had slipped onto the property while I was at the grocery store, staging a dangerous fire to manufacture a fraudulent paper trail of senility and negligence for future medical evaluations. Sitting in the quiet dark of my study, I listened in stunned silence as my only child systematically dismantled my sanity over a telephone wire for the sake of real estate profits and high-end luxury assets. Marcus pressed his advantage with corporate cheerfulness, announcing that he and Deborah had already taken proactive steps for my own protection by reserving a wonderful room for me at Maple Ridge Senior Living, a cheap, industrialized warehouse for the elderly, where old people were tucked away out of sight, while the remaining profits from my multi-million-dollar property were quietly funneled into high-yield investment accounts bearing Marcus and Deborah's names. The math of their greed was painfully transparent. Sell the 15-acre nursery for millions, institutionalize the troublesome mother in a subsidized facility costing pennies, and pocket the massive cash difference to fund their new life downtown. When I whispered a brief, trembling protest about having lived in these walls for 36 years and building this life alongside my late husband, Marcus's tone hardened instantly. The velvet slipped away, revealing the sharp, greedy iron underneath. He curtly informed me that the decision was legally binding, that the transfer papers were fully executed, and that there was no point in fighting the inevitable. He instructed me to pack a few bags over the weekend, adding that Deborah would stop by on Monday morning with professional movers to help me transition smoothly into my new facility. Before he could spin another syllable of his manipulative justification, I let out a soft, engineered sob, let the receiver slip slightly against my palm, and disconnected the call without a single word of goodbye. The room plunged into absolute, deafening silence. The digital recorder tucked safely inside my pocket blinked a tiny, steady red light against the dark fabric. Every single word of his gaslighting, every rehearsed lie about my mental state, and every explicit admission of their premeditated scheme was now safely captured on magnetic tape for the federal investigators to review and verify in a court of law. I leaned back slowly in my wooden chair, wiped the forced, theatrical tears from my cheeks, and looked out the window at the dark, sprawling rows of my nursery shining under the autumn moonlight. The fear that had briefly gripped my chest earlier in the day was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, unyielding resolve. Let them spend the weekend celebrating their easy, uncontested victory. Let them hire their movers and print their final paperwork. Monday morning was fast approaching, and my son and his bride are about to discover exactly what kind of deep, unbreakable roots a mother truly grows when she's pushed past her breaking point. The heavy mahogany doors of Priscilla's downtown office offered a stark contrast to the quiet country air of my nursery. I sat across from her desk as she slid a thick file folder toward me, filled with financial trails, corporate registry excerpts, and official notary records. Priscilla laid out the brutal reality of the investigation. The signature transfer wasn't just irregular, it was a total forgery, down to the micro details. The stamp on the deed belonged to Sheila Voss, a corrupted mobile notary tied to a massive syndicate that had illegally seized properties from at least a dozen vulnerable senior citizens across the county over the past 3 years. Marcus and Deborah weren't the masterminds running the ring. They were merely greedy, desperate opportunists who had willingly jumped headfirst into a criminal quagmire. They had hired Voss's network to execute the hit on my estate, leaving a wide-open paper trail straight back to their own bank accounts. We had the fraudulent notary stamp and forensic proof that my signature was digitally scanned from an old tax form and pasted onto the deed. But to trigger an immediate federal intervention before escrow funds cleared on Monday morning, we needed a clean, undeniable audio confession directly from Marcus and Deborah themselves. That was the strategy. 2 days later, on Saturday afternoon, I stood inside the glass-paneled foyer of the luxury penthouse downtown that Marcus and Deborah were renting with their anticipated profits. I carried a heavy, leather-bound box containing decades of family photo albums. Deborah opened the door with a strained, insincere smile of forced hospitality, while Marcus hovered near the floor-to-ceiling windows, pouring scotch. Inside the breast pocket of my heavy wool coat, a small digital audio recorder ran silently, its red light blinking against the dark fabric. Marcus dismissed my visit with a patronizing smirk, claiming everything was already handled by the movers for Monday morning. I kept my head bowed, intentionally adopting the posture of a frail, defeated woman, whispering that I just wanted to leave them with the family memories before I moved away. My apparent weakness was all their arrogance needed, believing completely that they had broken me and that I was a senile, helpless old woman incapable of understanding complex business. The polite host facade vanished entirely. The mask slipped away, revealing their cold, calculating greed. Marcus walked over to the kitchen island, poured another drink, and chuckled without lowering his voice. By Tuesday afternoon, the escrow transfer clears, Voss gets her cut, and we can finally lock down that lakeside villa in Westmont. Marcus laughed, his tone dripping with absolute condescension as he celebrated the commercial flip of my life's work. Deborah smiled, her eyes gleaming with avarice. And once the old lady is safely tucked away in Maple Ridge on a subsidized rate, nobody will ever audit where the rest of the multi-million-dollar payout went. We're completely in the clear. I stood silently by the coffee table, turning the pages of an old album showing Marcus as a laughing little boy, listening to my only son map out his future luxury lifestyle funded by the destruction of everything I had built. Every single word of their conspiracy was being sucked directly into the microphone hidden against my chest. I stayed for another 10 minutes, playing my part to perfection, before bidding them a fragile goodbye and walking out into the afternoon air. Less than an hour later, I was back in Priscilla's office, placing the microcassette chip onto her desk. Priscilla plugged the file into her workstation, and within seconds, Marcus and Deborah's triumphant voices echoed through the speakers, confessing to the entire scheme without a shred of ambiguity. Priscilla smiled, declaring it a masterclass evidence that handed them their own indictment on a silver platter. She immediately called a colleague, and within 20 minutes, a tall, sharp-eyed man in a tailored charcoal suit walked into the office. Margaret, meet Aaron Whitlock, a federal prosecutor specializing in elder financial abuse and organized real estate fraud syndicates. Aaron reviewed the digital audio files along with the forensic handwriting and signature scan reports. The digital scan proved the forgery, and the audio recording completely shattered any defense of a misunderstanding. Combined with the network data on Sheila Voss, federal law enforcement now had more than enough legal grounds to freeze all corporate escrow accounts and execute search warrants by Sunday evening. Aaron looked directly into my eyes with calm authority, assuring me that my son's arrogance had signed their legal doom. On Monday morning, federal marshals weren't just going to stop the moving trucks, they were going to shut down the entire operation. I nodded slowly, feeling the immense weight finally shift off my shoulders. The trap was fully set, the net was woven, and the hunters were about to become the hunted.
The heavy mahogany doors of Priscilla's downtown office had closed behind me days ago, leaving me with the final, quiet preparation for the storm. The morning sun on that fateful Monday barely managed to cut through the sharp autumn fog rolling over the valley, casting long, cold shadows across the sprawling rows of my nursery. At exactly 7 a.m., I stood alone in front of the full-length mirror in my upstairs hallway, taking a slow, deep breath to steady my nerves and anchor my resolve. Gone was the worn, faded gardening jacket and the frail, trembling posture I had carefully maintained over the past few weeks to keep them off balance. Instead, I wore a sharply tailored charcoal blazer over a crisp silk blouse, my posture upright, confident, and unyielding. Looking at my reflection, I no longer saw a terrified, gaslit mother on the verge of being discarded by her own flesh and blood. I saw the sole owner of this land, a woman who had carved this 15-acre sanctuary out of the wilderness alongside her late husband and was now fully prepared to defend every single inch of it against the vultures. Downstairs, the quiet tension in the living room was palpable, charged with the heavy, unyielding electricity of impending justice. By 7:30, Aaron Whitlock, the federal prosecutor, and two federal agents in understated suits arrived discreetly through the back kitchen entrance. They moved with absolute, silent precision, positioning themselves thoughtfully throughout the main floor, out of immediate sight from the front entryway, yet completely in control of every exit, corner, and perimeter angle. There was no theatrical drama, no nervous pacing, and no whispered panic, only the calm, crushing momentum of federal law enforcement preparing to close a trap that had been meticulously woven over the past few weeks. I walked down the grand staircase just as the grandfather clock in the foyer struck the hour of 8, the rhythmic ticking echoing like a countdown to their reckoning. Almost simultaneously, the crunch of heavy commercial tires rolled up the gravel driveway, shattering the morning quiet. First came the massive moving truck sent by Maple Ridge Senior Living, followed closely by Marcus's sleek European sedan, and right behind it, Lawyer Gerald's luxury town car. Through the sheer lace of the front windows, I watched them step out onto the stone pathway together. They were laughing and talking loudly, their body language dripping with the casual, repulsive arrogance of victors who believed they were merely executing the final administrative cleanup of a helpless, senile old woman before heading downtown to celebrate their multi-million-dollar payday. Marcus didn't bother knocking on the door of the home he had tried so ruthlessly to steal. With the entitled familiarity of someone who thought he already held the clean title deed in his pocket, he pulled a spare key from his designer keyring, shoved it roughly into the front door lock, and pushed it wide open without a second thought. "All right, Mom, the moving crew is here, so let's not make a scene and get these boxes loaded up," Marcus announced loudly, striding into the foyer with a broad, self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. The words died instantly in his throat. Marcus froze dead in his tracks on the threshold of the living room. The cheerful, arrogant smirk vanished from his face as if it had never existed, replaced by a sudden, sickening pallor. The color drained completely from his skin in a fraction of a second, leaving him looking ashen and ghost white, his eyes wide with stark, unadulterated terror as he stared past the coffee table. Sitting quietly in the wing-back armchair, dressed in my sharp charcoal blazer with the federal case files neatly stacked on the mahogany table before me, I didn't say a single word.
Behind me stood Aaron Whitlock, his expression impassive and authoritative, while from the shadowy corners of the room, the federal agents stepped forward, blocking every possible escape route. Deborah, trailing closely behind her husband while scrolling on her phone, walked right into Marcus's back as he suddenly seized up on the threshold. She stumbled forward, dropping her designer handbag onto the hardwood floor with a sharp, echoing thud. As she looked up to snap at him for stopping, her jaw dropped open and the breath left her lungs in a sharp, choked gasp as the grim reality of the room set in. At the front entryway, Gerald caught sight of the federal agents closing in from the hallway. His eyes darted wildly towards the front door, his hand instinctively reaching for the brass handle in a desperate attempt to slip away back to his car. Before his fingers could even graze the metal, one of the federal agents stepped smoothly into his path, blocking the exit with quiet, immovable authority. The heavy silence that filled the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant, idle rattling of the moving truck's engine outside. The grand illusion of their effortless victory had utterly shattered in a single heartbeat, leaving them standing face to face with the unbreakable reality of federal justice. Every calculated lie, every forged signature, and every greedy ambition had finally caught up to them, turning their triumphant morning into an inescapable nightmare of their own making.
The heavy silence inside the felt living room felt thick enough to suffocate, pressing down relentlessly on the shoulders of the three people who'd walked in just moments earlier thinking they were the absolute masters of this estate. I didn't rush. With slow, deliberate movements born of absolute control, I reached up, adjusted the sharp lapel of my charcoal blazer, and fastened the top button. Every eye in the room was locked onto me, trapped in the gravitational pull of a final reckoning they never saw coming. Without breaking eye contact with my son, I reached into the deep pocket of my trousers and pulled out a small digital recorder. With a simple, firm press of my thumb, I hit play, letting the device speak for itself across the quiet room. The audio filled the space instantly, crystal clear, sharp, and chillingly detailed. The speaker's voice, Marcus's voice, unmistakable and dripping with arrogant malice, echoed off the hardwood floors, detailing every calculated step of the scheme to declare me mentally unfit, force me into a substandard care facility, and quietly liquidate the nursery behind my back. Beside him, lawyer Gerald's voice chimed in with smooth, professional reassurance about forging signatures, bypassing probate court, and hiding assets from federal scrutiny while cutting me out completely. Deborah's face instantly lost whatever color Marcus had left behind. She staggered back against the hallway table, her hands flying to her mouth to choke back a sudden, hysterical cry of pure horror. Gerald's professional composure shattered into a million jagged pieces. His hands began to shake violently as he realized the tape didn't just capture a private conversation, it captured a fully documented, airtight conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Before anyone could lunge toward the recorder or find the breath to deny the undeniable truth, the federal agents moved with absolute, terrifying finality. The metallic click of steel handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room, cutting through the air like a gunshot. One by one, the cold rings locked tight around Marcus's wrists, biting sharply into his skin. Another set snapped onto Deborah's trembling hands as she began to sob uncontrollably, realizing her designer dreams and luxury lifestyle had just transformed overnight into a federal indictment. When the third pair of heavy cuffs clamped down on Gerald, the unpolished lawyer collapsed limply against the wall, his expensive leather briefcase sliding uselessly onto the floor at his feet. Marcus couldn't handle the sudden crushing reality. His knees buckled beneath him, and he dropped heavily onto the hardwood floor right at my feet. He looked up at me,
tears streaming down his face, his expression contorting into a mask of desperate, pathetic panic as he reached out a trembling hand to grab the hem of my trousers. Mom, Mom, please, you can stop this. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. We're family. Please, you raised me. Save me from this. Marcus wailed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate plea for mercy as his entire world crumbled into dust. I didn't flinch. I looked down at the boy I had raised, the son who had traded my life for a down payment on a penthouse, and felt nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness. I slowly crouched down until my face was level with his, my gaze steady, calm, and utterly devastating. Marcus, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register that echoed in the dead silence of the room. This nursery, this land you were so desperate to carve up, was never the real prize. To you, it was worth a few $100,000 in quick liquidation, but the true inheritance, the entire $120 million trust fund built from your father's patented drought-resistant plant species and our lifetime of labor, was meant to be handed over to you on your 35th birthday. But, as of last night, I signed every last document, transferring the entire estate into the National Conservation Foundation. You were so blinded by your own greed, so desperate to steal a roof over my head for pocket change, that you traded a multi-million-dollar empire for a prison cell. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He stared at me in absolute paralyzing disbelief, the magnitude of what he had destroyed finally crashing down on his soul like an avalanche of pure regret. No, no, you can't do that. That was mine, Marcus shrieked, his voice rising into a raw, blood-curdling howl of utter agony and bottomless despair as he realized he had thrown away an entire dynasty for a few drops of temporary greed. The federal agents pulled him roughly to his feet, hauling him toward the front door as his desperate screams bounced off the walls. I stood up straight, smoothing down my blazer, watching them drag him out into the bright morning light. The trap had closed, the debt was paid, and the silence that followed was finally, beautifully, mine.
When the final chapter of a storm closes, the silence left behind is heavier than the wind itself. For a long time, people think that destruction makes a loud noise, but true justice often arrives quietly, like the steady settling of dust after a collapse. If you tuned into this channel expecting a miraculous reconciliation, a tearful family reunion where everyone hugs and forgets, I need to be honest with you. Life is not a sentimental movie. Some bridges are not meant to be rebuilt. Some people are not meant to be saved because they are too busy burning down everything around them while holding the match. The unraveling of Sheila Voss's empire did not happen overnight, but when it fell completely. Federal investigators didn't just scratch the surface, they tore down the entire facade. The sophisticated network of shell companies, forged signatures, and fraudulent power of attorney documents evaporated under the glaring light of federal scrutiny. Sheila tried to run, tried to shift the blame onto her subordinates, tried to spin one last web of lies, but the evidence was ironclad. In the end, there were no dramatic courtroom explosions, just the cold, mechanical grinding of the wheels of justice. Across our neighborhood, elderly homeowners who had spent sleepless nights staring at foreclosure notices finally saw their property titles restored. I remember standing on my porch and watching Mrs. Gable, our next-door neighbor, whose life savings had nearly been stolen away, open her mailbox to find the official court document clearing her name. She didn't cry. She just stood there in the afternoon sun, holding the paper against her chest, letting out a breath she had been holding for years. That was the first real sign of healing in a community that had been bleeding for too long. As for Marcus, the reality of his choices finally caught up with him. He realized too late that loyalty built on convenience is worth less than dust.
When the prosecutors presented him with the full weight of the wire fraud and identity theft charges, his defense crumbled. He took a plea deal, trading a slightly reduced sentence for cooperation, but it couldn't save him from the outcome. The judge didn't offer sympathy. Marcus is now facing real, unvarnished prison time, years behind concrete walls where no amount of charm or smooth talking can buy back a ruined life. I remember the last time I saw him before the sentencing, standing in the sterile hallway of the courthouse. He looked at me, his eyes hollow, desperation bleeding through his voice. "Mom, you can't just let them do this to me. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please, you're my mother." I looked straight into his eyes, feeling neither anger nor pity, just a profound, quiet emptiness. I didn't yell, I didn't curse. I just looked at him and said, "I spent my whole life trying to protect you from the consequences of your own character, Marcus. Today, the only thing I can give you is the truth you chose to run away from." And then there was Deborah, the woman who once walked through high society galas like she owned the world, whose arrogance was a weapon she used against anyone she deemed beneath her. Her downfall was absolute. Stripped of her social standing, abandoned by the very circles she had curried favor with, and financially ruined by association with the scandal, she had to pack whatever dignity she had left into a couple of suitcases. She moved 3 states away, hiding under a low profile, working a minimum wage job in the back office of a regional warehouse. No more designer clothes, no more cameras, no more elite status. Just long hours, fluorescent lights, and the heavy silence of regret. In this house, the air changed. The scent of blooming gardenias and wet earth after a summer rain returned to my porch, untainted by the bitterness of betrayal. I didn't pack up and leave. This home was built by the hands of a man who loved me with honesty and respect, and I chose to stay right here, surrounded by the memories that mattered. The trust fund, the very money that had sparked greed, malice, and a ruthless scramble for inheritance, was restructured entirely. Not a single penny went to those who thought they could buy their way through life on the backs of others. Instead, we established agricultural and vocational scholarship programs bearing my late husband's name. Today, those funds are paying for the education of young people who actually want to work the land, build honest careers, and create something meaningful with their own hands. Every time a student receives a grant to study sustainable farming, I know my husband's legacy is living on in the best possible way. As I sit here today, looking out over the quiet fields, I have learned the hardest lesson a parent can ever face. Blood does not mean loyalty. Sometimes the people who share your DNA are the very ones waiting for the right moment to take everything you are. Love without respect is not love at all. It is simply a form of exploitation, neatly dressed up in the language of family to make the theft feel acceptable. The most expensive lesson of a lifetime is learning how to let go. It is accepting that you cannot save people who have chosen destruction as their compass, and that trying to rescue them only drags you down into the mud with them. True peace only begins the moment you step back, hand the reins over to justice, and let life teach them the lessons you could never force them to understand.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in? And what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.